So this part here is a bit of a Punch and Judy show, lest there be any doubt. I'm Judy. Koe nei, he mokopuna whakatoi a te runako Awaroa. So about 10 years ago, at which point in time I held an academic sinecure, Tipene sent me and fellow Ngaitahu historian Te Mairi Tau an email. It was a bit like one of Tipene's about Sid Aston's love letters, "Dear Sir, please pay." The sum total of this email was a quote from the Russian writer and philosopher Leo Tolstoy, quote, "Historians are like deaf people who go on answering questions that no one has asked them." It was not a life-affirming message. I quickly countered with Oscar Wilde, "Any fool can make history, but it takes a genius to write it." Thus commenced a vigorous tit-for-tat. The only person through this grubby little exchange who maintained his dignity was Te Mairi, simply because he is yet to reply to the email thread. In any event, if Tolstoy is correct, what should we make of the fact that Tipene, myself, and the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods are all historians? Why do we have top billing? Why should any of you listen to any of us? Well, because, to paraphrase G.K. Chesterton, you can be almost certain of being wrong about the future if you are wrong about the past. Having thus made this plea for marginal relevance, at least for my own part, I'm now going to extend some of the things that Tipene has just introduced, those of cohesion and alignment. But I'm going to do so through the lens of the annual Titi harvest, from which, like many other people in the room, I've recently returned. A couple of days ago, I looked like a ZZ Top tribute band, but I'm quite respectable now. Now, as several of you know, mutton birding in local parlance has two sequential components, te nanau me te rama. Now, the first part of the season, the nanau, takes place in the daytime, while the second part, the rama, takes place at night. Now, strictly speaking, rama is the name of the torches that our tipuna used, crafted to light their path and their work on the Titi Islands in the second stage of the season. Now, rama consisted of three main elements: tōtara bark, kato, and some pieces of remu, of kelp. Let me say something first about kato. This is our name for a ball of fat located in the lower half of the juvenile titi we harvest. You can see it there, big, glorious ball of kato. Now, for hundreds of years, until the early 20th century, processed titi were essentially boiled in kato and preserved in the resultant congealed hinu inside of poha, as you can see on the bottom right of the screen, those kelp bags. However, the highly flammable kato had many other uses. One of these was as a fuel source for rama, for these torches. The problem was, as I've just alluded to, that it burns too well, right? So very good to start the fire with. So consequently, green kelp, right, fresh kelp, was added into the rama to reduce the burning to an efficient sort of smouldering glow. Now, I personally think of the private sector as akin to kato, not greasy and unstable so much as the thing that brings us heat, brings us light, and ultimately brings us food. I think of the public sector, in turn, central and its local subaltern, local and central government, as the kelp, a wee bit cold, a wee bit wet, but with the necessary task of restraining the burning kato and the burning hinu to a point. Right? You can see where I'm going with this, I think. Too much kato and someone or something will get burnt. Too much kelp and people will go hungry. The bigger point here, though, as we think about these notions of cohesion and alignment, is that kato is kato and remu is remu. One cannot be the other, nor should one dominate the other. The aim is for a judicious convergence of distinct elements. Now, given that iwi have both private and public sector attributes, you might reasonably wonder whether we ultimately see ourselves as being part of the kato or part of the remu. I put it to you that we are in fact the kiri tōtara, the bark sheath in which you were all rolled up inside of. I think this wānanga speaks very strongly to that characterisation. Some might think that to be an extraordinarily arrogant comment, incongruous for a people famous above all for humility. But it ought not to be understood as an arrogant comment. Without katoa and without te rimu, without you, without all of you, we're just a strip of bark. Good for plenty of things, but not for lighting the way forward. I therefore think this depiction again illustrates all of us in this room and the entities we represent, our interdependence. And that is the first of two things I want you to take away from my opening remarks this morning. We really are all in this together. So anyone looking to play a zero-sum game need not apply. And that segues directly into my second takeaway point. Although colonial New Zealand, like other Anglo-settler colonies, was substantially built upon the elimination of the native, in the oft-quoted words of the late Australian historian Patrick Wolfe, we Ngāi Tahu are still here. As the poet Carlo Mila so evocatively put it, the dying race did the dirty and lived longer. Powerful institutions and individuals who once confidently and eagerly anticipated our extinction and utilised the state's coercive powers to try and actualise it, themselves no longer exist. There are no teachers here today from Kanini School. There are no elected representatives here today from the Bluff Borough Council. We haven't just outlived antagonistic councillors, we've outlasted antagonistic councils. The Anglican mafia that ran half of Bluff for a century, the Nicol family, do not live there anymore. The Ward family that owned more than half of the Bluff waterfront and Main Street in the early 20th century do not own any of it anymore. But the Topi family, whose patriarch, Tione Topi Pātoki, ran his own whaleboat in the port 3 decades before that maverick Mick, Sir Joseph Ward, was even running around the town in short pants, own part of the freehold that he once did. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that capitalism was transitory at Awarua. My point is that Ngāi Tahu collective capitalism has endured in southern Murihiku and is expanding. So-called New New Zealand is starting to look a hell of a lot like old New Zealand. I want now to turn towards something of a conclusion through reference to the aforementioned Rakatira Topi Pātoki. In 1860, by which time it was clear that Ngāi Tahu communities and whānau were being cut off from traditional food sources and simultaneously locked out of the colonial economy subsuming them, Topi warned the settler state that, quote, if you do not allow us full privileges, we shall be like rats which steal the food out of the houses. You say there is one law for all of us. No mere simile, in my view, Topi was literally gesturing towards the green shoots of wicked plants whose bitter fruit includes disproportionately low rates of Māori home ownership and unconscionably high rates of incarceration. Bill English was right. New Zealand's prisons are a moral and fiscal failure. But while none of us can go back, as C.S. Lewis put it, and change the beginning, we can start where we are now and change the ending. And that should be good for everyone who calls this archipelago home. As the American novelist Toni Morrison asserts, quote, if you're going to hold someone down, you're going to have to hold on by the other end of the chain. You are confined by your own repression. So as we throw off these chains and we change our ending, let us ever think of the Rama, our original light on the hill. Kia ora tātou. Honourable Dr. Megan Woods will now have the floor.